Chairman, I'd like to call Ed Pimentel to testify. Mr. Pimentel's testified several times in regard to this project. His resume is attached to his report, which is an exhibit to our memorandum, which is Exhibit 1, and specifically, excuse me, I gave Mr. Pimentel's resume too.
I have
We have them already.
Okay.
Hold on, I've already been included as Exhibit 4.
Very good. Mr. Pimentel, would you please tell us your qualifications?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm pressing. Swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Gotcha.
That's Edward Pimentel, that's P as in Paul, I-M-E-N-T-E-L.
Mr. Pimentel, could you please briefly tell us about your qualifications as a planner?
Sure. So I have both a bachelor's and a master's in urban planning. I've been a nationally certified planner holding the credentials, the American Institute of Certified Planners credentials, since 1994. I've been a planner for approximately 3 decades. I've worked in several communities as a municipal planner in Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Florida. I am currently the zoning official for the city of East Providence, and then approximately 2 decades ago I also commenced and started a consulting practice. I've testified before all 39 cities and towns in Rhode Island, many communities throughout southeastern Mass, and all the superior courts.
I move that Mr. Pimentel be certified as a planning expert.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to accept Edward Pimentel as a planning expert for the project.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay.
Mr. Pimentel, would you please address the board in regard to the dimensional and other variances that are being sought by the applicant in regard to this proposed building and the hardships as you see them presented to this project?
Sure. So, although I was not a consultant on the original development back in 2007, I was asked to get involved in the development of this property from the initial out stages right prior to the master plan phase. Something that hasn't been mentioned on the record is that in addition to requiring the relief from this board, is that this project was defined as a major land development project. So there was a series of regulatory review and procedures you had to go through before we could even attain the rights to come before the zoning board of review. So as a major land development project, as established by law, we had to proceed to them first to attain the master plan approval. And then as part and parcel of that, because it's in the historic district, we had to attain HDC approval as well. And only then could we come before the zoning board of review. What does that entail? Well,
I'd just like to point out that Exhibit 1D is Mr. Pimentel's report.
So at the master plan stage, there are several standards that have to be satisfied to the planning board. One of them is consistency with the comprehensive plan. And that entails that the development itself is not only consistent in accordance with the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan, but that it's consistent with the neighborhood character. There are several other standards that have to be met in regards to the appropriateness of the development of the property, and I brought myself up to speed because this was part and parcel of a prior development. This wasn't being developed in a vacuum. And as such, it had to be discussed at that level too. And it's in my report, and I did discuss that with the planning board. Subsequent to that, as this board well knows, that decision was appealed to this board, and this board affirmed that decision of the planning board and those standards. So now we're at the next stage of review, and that's the requisite zoning relief. So the next stage of review, and we have to address the requisite variances. So there are several burdens that need to be met. But in fact, they're really broken down into 2 components. There's really 2 litmus tests that have to be satisfied. First and foremost, we have to satisfy this board that there's hardship present in this property. when I got involved in this development, first and foremost, I do with all developments, I sit down with the design team, we go through what is to be accomplished here, what is our objectives and goals, given what's required pursuant to the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is your foundation, your regulatory foundation document for any community. And from there, you establish your regulatory tools, your zoning tools, your subdivision land development regulations, etc. So, in light of those goals and objectives, this is your urban downtown core. This is where you want to see your mixed-use development. This is where you want to push your density. You want to see that mixture of residential presence to serve the commercial needs, to bring vitality. Given all of those and all of the other hardships that I was able to glean from all of the consultants on this project, I determined there were several hardships associated with the subject property. The property is a corner lot, that's already been testified to, so this is not just a straight singular frontage. The topography of the property, because it slopes down, and in addition to that, it's in the flood zone. That brings on certain variances that cannot be mitigated. There's already a two-story parking deck. An accessory use that's attached to a principal use on another property. That clearly was part and parcel of a previous review, and now that has to be blended in, not only to this development, but meeting the needs of that prior approval. There's clearly the historic component that's already been addressed, and that plays into massing and scale and overall height and character of neighborhood. So there was, and then topography again, as I noted. So there were several hardships associated with the property I was able to glean from working with the design team, from my thorough review of the comprehensive plan, and then reviewing through the zoning code. So now that we've established the presence of hardships, what is the relief that's required to cure those hardships? Because there's been an argument put forth, because I've been involved in this development for over a year now, about quantity of variances, are we seeking the least number of variances? This is kind of the arguments that have been put forth. But you have to balance the several burdens. You're seeking relief to cure a hardship, to effectuate the goals and objectives of the local comprehensive community plan, and to realize a development that's economically feasible. I mean, there's case point in this community, there's case point in the Superior Court. So you're balancing all of these tests. To argue that if we eliminated one parking space, we could widen and diminish the relief by a little bit. But what does that result on the opposite end? Because the regulations say that you don't require parking in the downtown district, doesn't mean that you're not supposed to provide parking. What the regulations are stating, and I know this because I've written these regulations for other communities, is that there's certain instances parking is simply not feasible. So what we're trying to do is, we're trying to provide flexibility. If every time a business is changing hands to another, or changing usage, or intensifying, has to keep coming back to the board to get more and more parking relief, it doesn't help or spur the goals and objectives of the comp plan. So what you do is, you provide flexibility through your zoning code. But that doesn't mean that if you have the opportunity, you shouldn't. That's absurd. That's why the initial development noted there's so little opportunity for redevelopment in the downtown Bristol core that if you can provide parking, and you can provide additional parking to offset, so that you leave the on-street parking to serve the needs of other uses that can't furnish, of course you would support that. That's good planning. To mandate, oh, you could provide the parking, but you shouldn't, that's absurd. I'm sorry, that's an absurd argument. So that's why we ask, when we say balancing the quantity of variances, the intensity of variances, you're balancing that with the end development goals and objectives, what you're trying to realize, really your goals and objectives, your comp plan, and overall, is it consistent and does it better or further the health, safety, welfare, convenience of that community, of that neighborhood? This development accomplishes that. So, having addressed all of those, it was my professional opinion that there was more than a single hardship, there were several hardships, and that the variances were reasonable, and in that vein, they were the least relief necessary to effectuate this development that, in my opinion, is absolutely consistent with your comp plan. I don't know if the board has any questions.
Mr. Pimentel, you mentioned a case before this board, where this board granted relief for additional units based upon economic infeasibility. Is that the matter involving 1200 Hope Street?
That is indeed.
And then you also mentioned a case in the Superior Court, I believe Judge Carnes. Is that the case you're referring to in regard to economic infeasibility being considered a proper hardship for the grant of a variance?
Objection. That's a purely legal question, interpretation of a case. And, that case does not say that. We can brief that for the board later on.
And I think the objection should be overruled for now. They can brief it at the other time. He's talking about, as a planner and a case on land use, I think if he can't answer, he should answer.
Sure. So, purely answering from a land use perspective, I'm not playing lawyer here. That case actually addressed the infeasibility of an historic structure and the economics of restoring that structure and whether they needed to increase the density, which, by the way, in that case, it wasn't just a dimensional, it was a use-related application. So they had to prove lack of all beneficial use. And then there was the part of the determination, they had to prove loss of all beneficial use. And in that case, they made the determination that the increased density, which spurred the need for both the use and dimensional variance, the economic feasibility of the project actually was grounds to justify hardship.
Now, in terms of the hardships that you mentioned, is the fact of the matter it's in a flood zone another aspect of the hardship for this property?
That is correct.
And what about the way in which the surrounding neighborhood has been developed?
Absolutely. I did an extensive neighborhood analysis for the edification of the planning board, as I was required to render a consistency argument with both neighborhood and the comp plan. It was part of the record. And when I say extensive, I looked at every individual parcel in the surrounding blocks. There were literally, it must have been somewhere between 50 and 150 properties I analyzed. And I put it into a spreadsheet and so forth. And if you look at the character of this neighborhood, honestly, I don't have the ability to trespass on anybody's property, but having done this for 30 years, doing both planning and zoning, I would say would probably I could easily determine that there was probably a half a dozen or more property nonconformities with every property. It's an old neighborhood. You can't possibly author regulations that would realize consistency with every parcel. It's impossible. The only type of zoning that would allow that would be if you had some kind of form-based zoning, which would be more of a kind of a negotiative process zoning that establishes footprint based on lot size and so forth. That's not what we have here. Although your comprehensive plan does recommend that you pursue form-based zoning for this area, given that the zoning code is not really helping to put forth development because it realizes this degree of relief. But having said that, it's an older established neighborhood. It just, with a wide variety of lot sizes, many deficient, a wide variety of land uses and densities, it is what you expect in any older urbanized environment.
Now, tell us whether another aspect of the hardship suffered by this project is the requirement of complying with Secretary of Interior standards.
Yes. So, as once again, just as very briefly from a land use perspective, this is why you work cohesively as a team. And this is why when you come to this point, where I'm testifying, you're relying also on a lot of expert opinion from people from different professions. So the Historic District Secretary of Interior standards talk about balancing development that is not mirroring that which is historical in nature, and also but balancing that and showing its true period time frame. And that's why the architects had to balance the massing, scale of the design in character, which led to the overall height issue from the HDC and so forth. So that was one of the hardships.
Based upon your review of the project, do you have an opinion as to whether the relief being requested is the least necessary to accomplish the construction of this project?
I do indeed. I believe it absolutely is.
And in terms of the area dimensional request for the reduction in the size of the units. Tell us whether, what your opinion is in regard to whether or not, if that were not granted, if the applicant would suffer more than the mere inconvenience.
Sure. So once again, we get down to, there are several reasons for this, massing and scale, and then what goes on internally, the economic feasibility. So relying again on respective expert testimony from other experts. You have a certain building on massing and scale. It's visually appropriate. It's architecturally appropriate. At that point, from a land use perspective, whether it's 10 or 20 units inside, I have no concern from a perspective of what difference would that make, because it comes down to me, what is the comprehensive plan calling for? Now I'm talking from a land use. The comprehensive plan tells me that they want to see densification in your urban downtown core. To render commercial entities viable in the downtown urban core, you have to have the residential presence. That's why in many communities, it doesn't even come down to density, it comes down to ratios. A certain percentage of this to a percentage of this. Usually a great percentage of residential to the commercial, because you need to realize that residential presence to thrive that commercial business. Then of course on top of that, providing the economics and the testimony from Mr. Scotti, that's why I was able to lead and conclude that the density is absolutely appropriate.
Now, based upon your experience over a couple of decades as a planner, serving as a planner in various communities, zoning official in East Providence, you have an opinion as to whether this increased density will serve to generate additional business and economic activity in the area.
I've said before, the variances you seek have to play part and parcel to the overall goal of this board, that we must satisfy this board. Is this furthering the health, welfare, convenience of this community, of that neighborhood? Absolutely it will. There's a lot of retail space, some vacant space. You want to bring more commercial space in because that's where the true tax generation is being rendered. How do you do that? You need to densify, you need to bring in the density. There's a subjective number of 1 unit per 4,000 square feet. This isn't hard science here. It's a subjective number, right? Is it 1 per 1,000? Is it 1 per 10,000? It's a subjective number. So clearly, what you have to then turn to is your goals and objectives, your comp plan. It talks about densifying the urban downtown core. So I say it is absolutely appropriate.
I don't have any further questions of Mr. Clement. Do we have any questions?
I don't, Mr. Chairman. Any questions?